everybody. It is your girl, once again, Shay here with you. If you are down with me, you know me as what? Chelsea. And we are back. It is so good to be back. Of course, for those who do and don't know, this is my second annual event series that celebrates and acknowledges the beautiful National Minority Mental Health Month. Now, last year was a success, considering we had some awesome people both on board and behind the scenes. And those included non-for-profits and national foundations, private and public HBCUs and universities, such as Charles R.G. University of Medicine and Science, Black Girls Code, and the Epilepsy Foundation of Florida, who we will shout out later in this episode, and the Michael Anthony Foundation. Now, I am super excited, as you can tell, to have a second go-round of this series, and this time bigger and better on two platforms, YouTube, in which you are watching, and StreamYard, which is where I am from. So please find all of the links on my Instagram page at shay.lan, SHEA.LANIN, and our upcoming events following this one there as well, because I believe we may have an episode following this one with Dr. Chandrai Kumanyeka, who will talk about the Black experience along with hip hop. So y'all make sure to tune in when and if we confirm that one. And lastly, before we actually get into this last episode, I believe, of our 2021 series, do not forget to share, like, and follow the Instagram below. And don't be shy. Share this live to your friends and your family. And don't forget to, if you can and will, that your gifts can be sent to my Cash App pinned below at ChayBella7. And they will be split with today's feature and my college savings if they so choose. Now, let's get to it. Today, our feature will be journalist, historian, and author of 6 books, most recently Desperate Engagement, Mark Leepson. Actually, let's not rush. Let's actually pull up his book, y'all. Desperate Engagement, shown right here, just for you. Yes, Mark Leepson. Today he will be with me exploring the title Objective History of the American Flag. So we are super excited, and we are going to add him to the stream once he turns his camera on. But you know what? Let's not wait. Let's actually get right into it. Let's go really quick into what is Minority Mental Health Month, really brief. What does it mean? What are we bringing awareness to for some 31 days? Well, Minority Mental Health Month brings awareness to the unique struggles that underrepresented groups face in regards to mental illness in the U.S., and it became formally recognized back in 2008 and by our team here as of July of last year. So now let's add Mark Leepson to the stream so we can begin this conversation. Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm excited for this conversation.
You look very happy and excited.
Yes. So let's begin with a brief little disclaimer. Let's see. This series is not meant to associate or assume mental illness or general issues on or with anyone, but instead it's simply just an open discussion regarding how we as a community are affected by the societal and historical factors that come into play when covering the significance of mental health. Lastly, we'll just give a shout out to the Epilepsy Foundation of Florida, specifically Thomasita Kozart, for the shirts that will be in you all's self-care packages for the most engaged commenter today, pardon me. And so the gifts that the Epilepsy Foundation of Florida provided with us today included sunglasses and stickers and t-shirts. So we'll be on the lookout for y'all's comments. So let's now get into the fun stuff. So Mark, please tell us about yourself. How did you get into journalism and American history and writing?
Well, I'm old, so this happened a long time ago, but I went to college and I majored in history, but only because you had to choose a major. There was a history professor that I liked, and so I decided to major in history, but I didn't have that giant interest in it. And then when I graduated from college, I got drafted into the Army. Do you know what the draft is? Do you know what that is?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. When I was, so this was the 60s, right? And back then, they couldn't get enough people to join the military, so they drafted you. They chose you. Everybody, men only, who were over 18, had to register with their draft board. And if the military needed you, they chose you. And of course, there was a war going on, the Vietnam War. So I was drafted in July of '67, and I was in the Army for 2 years. I was in the Vietnam War for a year. And when I came back, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I know one thing I didn't want to do, which was go to work. So I decided to go to graduate school, and I didn't really have much interest in a lot of different things, but I did have this slight interest in history. And I went back, and then when I was in graduate school, I went to George Washington in Washington, D.C., where I went to undergrad. I got interested in history. I had a very dynamic history professor. I was studying, everybody was studying U.S. history, but I decided to study 17th century English history. So, and I was going to get my PhD, and I was going to teach. But, there's something called the GI Bill, which the government helps you out if you're a veteran with tuition and so on. But it wasn't very good for us in the Vietnam War. And I ran out of money. So I got my MA in history, and I kind of screwed around for a couple of years. But it was the 60s, so actually early 70s. But anyway, a long story short, I thought I wanted to write, and I got into journalism. So I got my first job in journalism in 1974 when I was 28 years old. I worked for Congressional Quarterly, which is the magazine that covers Congress. And I worked my way up to be a staff writer for 9 years. And I worked there a total of 11 years, and then I decided I would do freelance writing and maybe write some books. So that's kind of how it happened. When I went freelance, I did a lot of magazine work, and then I got my first book in 1999. And actually, I have 9 books published. And you saw an old website that said 6, but that's okay. I had 3 since then. So. And, 3 of them were biographies, 5 of them were U.S. history. So that's a long answer to your short question.
No, that's perfect. You give a perfect overview. And all right, so what are we talking about today? These changing perceptions for the American flag. Those perceptions, the sides, and so we're going to break it down into 5 parts. 1, American History 101, to just provide some context. American Flag 101, perceptions, a symbol of beauty or intimidation, impacts, and solutions. So let's begin with American history. So I'll simply ask you, not even simply, because I don't know, however you want to take this, but give us a 5-minute timeline of the flag of the U.S. Who was Betty Ross? How did Flag Day come to be? Is the Philadelphia Seamstress story a myth? Just give us the time.
Okay, well, that's impossible, but I'll give it a try. Okay. I wrote this book called Flag, an American Biography, which I brought here. So this is a history of the American flag from the beginning. There you go. Thank you. From the beginnings, from the Revolutionary War to the 21st century. The book came out in 2004. So it's really hard to summarize, but the American flag was born on June 14th, 1777. I think you may know that June 14th is Flag Day. It's a national holiday, but not one of our big national holidays. You don't get off school. Very good. June 14th, 1777. So this was during the Revolutionary War, and the Continental Congress, which was the forerunner to our Congress, enacted a resolution saying the flag of the United States shall be 13 stars, white in a blue field, and 13 stripes, red and white stripes. So that's when the flag was born. Strangely enough, the war that we fought against the British for our freedom, the Revolutionary War, was not fought under that flag because it. If you show a picture of the the cover again, you could see that it's, the big red, white, and blue was the original flag. Thank you. So the canton is where the white stars are, right? So in the first American flag, the canton had the Union Jack, which was the British flag. So George Washington didn't think it was a great idea to have the flag of our enemy. Okay, let me see my face again. Yeah. It was a little disconcerting. So Washington didn't think it was a great idea to have the flag of our enemy in our flag. So that war was fought under unit and regimental flags. A lot of them were red, white, and blue. A lot of them had stars and stripes. The Betsy Ross story that, in May of 1777, George Washington and the Flag Committee of the Congress came to her, and they didn't know what to do, and she told them they would have the flag should be 13 stars in a circle, and she actually showed them how to cut the stars out to form 5-pointed stars. Yes, you are correct. It is a myth. Everyone who studied it has come to that conclusion. There is no evidence that there was a flag committee, much less George Washington going there to. Now, the woman, Betsy Ross, was a real person, and she shouldn't be discredited because she was a formidable woman. She was, divorced 3 times. She was a seamstress. She did make some flags, or they were called ensigns at the time. So that's a myth that has taken hold. It started in the 1870s, and but it's simply, if it's true, there's no good evidence that it is. So to bring the story up, I think the most important thing that you should know about how Americans feel about this flag is that for the first third of our nation's history, right up until 1861 and the start of the Civil War, it was almost unheard of for individual Americans to fly the flag. It just wasn't done. People didn't think about the flag that way. It was mostly flown by the government, mostly by the military, and mostly by the Navy in those days as a signaling and communications device. Now, that all changed, and it changed as very few things do in history very, very quickly. And when did it change? It changed in 1861 when the Civil War started. And then where you didn't see them, we're talking about the North now, right? But where you didn't see them anywhere, almost overnight when, Fort Sumter fell and the war began, the American flag was everywhere, in front of people's houses, in front of schools, in front of businesses. Women wore little flags on their hats. People put it in on their wagons, like people do on their pickup trucks or whatever. And this is the beginning of what historians call the cult of the flag. So the cult of the flag, this almost religious-like feeling that Americans have for our flag. And the cult of the flag spread nationwide in the last third of the 19th century, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, turn of the 20th century. And what did you have then? You had the promulgation of the Betsy Ross myth, which started in 1870. You had the Pledge of Allegiance, which started in 1892. It was meant for a nationwide school children observance of the 400th anniversary of Columbus's voyage, 1492, and it quickly spread nationwide. You had the first stirrings for a Flag Day holiday on June 14th. You had the first flag protection laws that went into effect in the states, in which it didn't have anything to do with politics back then. It had to do with no one was burning flags in protest back in the 1890s and around 1900. But what happened was that the first flag protection laws in the states were against the rampant use of the commercial image of the flag on products. It was on everything. Once there was mass production, once there was color printing, you saw the flag on, everything, beer, whiskey, clothing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, in a nutshell, how it has come now in the 21st century for so many Americans to have so much emotion wrapped up in this emblem of ours, the flag of the United States. And, calling it the cult of the flag signifies how emotional and how it's almost a religious thing with so many people.
And that's exactly what we are going to be covering today: the emotions wrapped up in the flag, and where religion plays a role. But we'll segue now into American Flag 101, the second part of this episode. So, the American flag, as we know it, is vital to our nation and to its citizens, particularly as the flag remains a major symbol during the country's times of peace and of war. And so the American flag, again, as we know it, gives meaning to the American body as a collective whole, whereas the American body's utilization of the flag allows for individual interpretation and negotiation of the meanings assigned by the flag. So my question to you, which was just honestly a thought that I posed to myself writing all of this down, was: is patriotism and nationalism the flag, or is it the body?
Hmm. You ask a very good question, and you phrased it very, very well. I would have probably said about the same thing. This is a really difficult question. It all comes from the cult of the flag. It all comes from the meaning. I mean, if you take one particular example of, athletes, say, protesting at games, they are not protesting the people who died for that flag. They are protesting what the flag, what their country stands for as embodied in that flag. But as I guess everybody knows, people who get very, very upset about that believe that they are tarnishing, everyone. Listen, I was in the military. I served. I had to take an oath to my country and to my flag to defend it to my death. And I did. And so did millions and millions and millions of other Americans. And people, take that very seriously. So people are reacting because of that, I think. And, the other thing is there isn't a cult of the flag in any other country. Do you know that? I mean, it's peculiar to the United States. And, the reasons, I have a master's degree in history. I don't have a PhD in psychology or sociology, but, I've studied this a lot. And I think I can get at a little bit of the reasons why. And, for one thing, we've never had a monarchy, right? And there's something seemingly, or a state religion. So there's something seemingly in every country in which there is a yearning for a king, a queen, a monarchy to symbolize the nation, and a flag goes along with it here. But we've never had a king. We've never, remember that George Washington, some people wanted him to declare himself king after the Revolutionary War. He said, "No, that's not what we do here. We have a democracy. We have a republic." And so there is, I think, a very strong feeling in peoples all over the world, a yearning for a monarch, a yearning for the trappings of monarchy. And in this country, the trappings of monarchy seem to me to be wrapped up very heavily in that flag. So those are the, and the other thing is we're a nation of immigrants. And a lot of immigrants have rallied around that flag as a symbol of unity. Now we're talking about, the large influx of immigration that happened, 125 years. We're talking about 1880s, 1890s, 1900s. That's when we had millions and millions of people who came here from Eastern and Central Europe. And a lot of them, that flag meant an awful lot to them from the time they were here, and they passed it on to generations who have come after. So I can nibble around at the answer, and I'm not totally satisfied with it, but I think those are some things to consider.
Okay, and that works perfectly fine, because there are multiple interpretations to the flag from multiple groups across the U.S. So you can't exactly pinpoint an answer, which is just fine. But I would like to read you a quote by Henry Ward Beecher that reads, "A thoughtful mind," and I actually want to pull it up here if it wants to cooperate. Yes. A thoughtful mind, when it sees a nation's flag, sees not the flag, but the nation itself. And whatever may be its symbols, its insignia, He reads chiefly in the flag, the government, the principles, the truths, the history that belongs to the nation that sets it forth. The American flag has been a symbol of liberty, and men rejoiced in it. And so the question I'll pose here is why aren't we considering the now when it comes to, let me see, the conflict between groups' perceptions of the flag? And why is it so hard to move from the has when he says the American flag has been a symbol of liberty and men rejoiced in it? And why can't we just consider the now, if that makes sense?
That's another very good question, and
Okay.
I hope I can answer it. But you got to remember Henry Ward Beecher, when he said that. When was that? 100 years ago, more than that. I think that a lot has happened since then, and a lot of people have woken up to. Well, let's go back a little bit in history, not so far back as Beecher, but let's talk about the Vietnam War for a minute. As you said earlier, and you said it so rightly, the flag is something that a nation can rally around during wartime. It happened in the Civil War in the North, and then every other war that's happened since then, and national catastrophe such as 9/11, flag comes out. When the Civil War started in the Spanish-American War in 1898, it was the first war that was fought by the former enemies, North and South, under the American flag. It was noted at the time. And when World War I started and World War II started, the same thing happened with the Americans rallying around the flag. Korean War, not so much. But during the Vietnam War, which was different than any other American war, until Afghanistan, it was the longest American war, longest overseas American war, and by far, except for the Civil War, the most controversial. The nation was bitterly divided, not so much when Americans got into it heavily in 1964, 65, 66, 67, but by 1968, the nation was very bitterly divided, and there was a very, very strong anti-war movement. And for the first time in the nation's history, the flag was used to protest a war and to protest what the government was doing, to your point, right? So I think that was a big change in this perception of the American flag. Even people who grew up in the 1950s, like I did, who were imbued with the cult of the flag growing up, began to question what their nation was doing and used the flag as an emblem as such. So, and I think that a lot of things that happened in American society during the Vietnam War paved the way, or at least led into what's happened in the second half of the 20th century and into the 21st century. And I think a lot of that has to do with perceptions of the flag as we're talking about.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that bitter divide and the use of the flag in protest in the next part when we're talking about perceptions, because we'll analyze two events, one being the insurrection and one being kneeling. So yes, so let's begin with the American flag continuing to be a symbol for its citizens, but its popularity and prevalence rising and falling like the stock market, depending on the national mood. So although the American flag offers a context through which we can understand and assign the flag meaning, the way Americans use their bodies to uphold the flag is telling of the support or lack of support they have for the flag and what it represents. The thing that I'd like to briefly bring up is that this freedom and this equality and the liberty that the flag stands to represent is inaccessible to minorities. It's, in this case, Black Americans. So when it comes to privileges, Black Americans do not have any gainful privileges in the United States. Instead, we have the privilege to be disproportionately killed by the police. We have the privilege to have decades of our lives stolen from us through wrongful convictions and an unjust criminal justice system. We've had the privilege of redlining, to be featured in enslaved cotton harvesters on 19th century currency. and the list can go on. So the question I'll pose to you is, what would be the real solution to these? I know they're very deep, but the real solution to these. I know I keep saying the word, but these perceptions, because I've been watching these debates in preparation of this conversation, and when you have, whether it be a student body debating over what the American flag means to them, if it's appropriate on campus, or just a debate among adults, something I hear specifically young adults saying is, why can't we just replace it? And, it's like, well, there's a lot of whys and because with that. So that would be my question. What would be the real solution, just besides creating a whole new flag?
Yeah, that's an unanswerable question, but it's not a bad question. A part of that debate in the past, before Black Lives Matter and before the athletes' protests, or the most recent ones, people had been advocating, I would say. It's never been strong, but there has been sentiment. Listen, the Star Spangled Banner was not officially, it was written in 1814, but it didn't become the official national anthem until 1931. And there was a big debate in Congress when they were going to do it, and there were people arguing against it back then, for different reasons. Although some of them are what people are talking about today vis-a-vis the flag or the national anthem too. I mean, there are people who are not happy with it and would like to see that replaced. Some reasons are different. It's hard to sing. Some of the reasons aren't political. It's hard to sing. I think that. It's like 7 octaves, and if you start on a high note, you're really sunk when you come later. But there were others. It was based on a tune that was written by a British person. It ends with a question. And then there's those troublesome words that Francis Scott Key wrote, several of them, the land of the free and the home of the brave in 1814, when millions of people were enslaved. And, there's that third verse that nobody sings, but it's in there, in which he's talking about the hireling and the slave. Basically, most historians believe that he's referring to, Key was a slave owner from a slave-owning family. And most historians believe that when he speaks of the hireling and the slave, that was in reference to the thousands of enslaved people who escaped and rallied to the British during the Revolutionary War and also during the War of 1812. And, he talks about that they should go to their graves. So, that wasn't an issue back then, but it certainly is now when people examine it. Although I have to tell you, there are some people who argue that the word slave in there does not mean enslaved people. I don't buy it, but I have heard people argue that. So anyway, I've kind of lost my train of thought there, but tell me the main thing I'm trying to talk about here.
No, you can. So the real solution to just creating a new flag.
Yeah. It really, I just don't see it happening. I don't. It's too ingrained among too many tens of millions of people. And if you want to talk about the Pledge of Allegiance, that's another thing that's changed. It's changed 3 times since it started. Remember, we talked about that it started in 1892. And it was meant, the original words were, I pledge allegiance to my flag and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I pledge allegiance to my flag. What was that aimed at? That was aimed at these young children of immigrants, and then the immigrant children who came over, to have them, inculcate patriotism and love of their country from a very early age. And it was meant for school children. And, it wasn't until 1988 that Congress first started reciting the Pledge of Allegiance before their legislative day. And then after that, by the 90s and around the turn of this century, now you see the Pledge of Allegiance not just for school children, but for, every, city council, town council, board of supervisors, state legislatures. Veterans groups and patriotic groups have always done it. So, and of course, the words were changed. They took away "I pledge allegiance to my flag" in 1923 and changed it to "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America." And then in 1954, during the height of the communist scare, they're in the height of the Cold War and rampant anti-communism in the United States, "Under God" was put in there. So, interestingly enough, the Supreme Court ruled in the 1940s that mandatory pledge laws are unconstitutional based on the First Amendment. So you cannot be forced to say the Pledge of Allegiance, although some states have tried to do it.
Nah, that's something I find interesting. How those little pieces were added over time.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there are 3 changes in it. Right. Yeah.
That's something I'll have to look into afterward, because that's something I find interesting. And so, so now we have the American flag. We've talked about the history. We talked about its adaptations over time. And now we can speak on its variations, because we know it's taken on a significant meaning for many Americans. But it's also, lost my train of thought.
Yeah, it happens.
But it's like, whoa. But it's also taken on many variations that symbolize other things that some Americans take pride in. So that one that we'll post here is the Black American flag with the thin blue line. So could you just tell us what that means and represents in recent American history?
Yeah. Well, let me say first that there's something called the U.S. Flag Code. By the way, those flag protection laws that I talked about that were enacted in all the states by the turn of the 20th century, and there was a federal flag protection law passed in 1968 during the Vietnam War. They were all ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in 1989. Again, it was a freedom of speech issue. So it's not illegal to burn the American flag. Now, the U.S. Flag Code is different from flag protection laws. The Flag Code has been on the books in the federal government since 1942, I think. And but even though it's in the federal code, law code, you have to think of the Flag Code as a series of guidelines, because you're not going to be arrested if you're in violation of anything in the Flag Code. There's no flag police. Because, among other things, the Flag Code frowns upon using the image of the flag in any commercial product. So any flag that is on a hat or a T-shirt or a bikini or, whatever is technically against the Flag Code, but you'll see, millions of Americans wearing flag hats and so on. And I think that, to your point about these kind of flags that have different messages on them, yeah, they're all against the U.S. Flag Code, but, no one's going to get arrested for selling one of those or owning one of those. And, I think their meanings are, they're in the eye of the beholder, don't you think? I mean, you can debate how different people have different feelings about the red, white, and blue. But when you see a protest flag like the one you showed, I think most people realize what that's all about. So, and, I'm just going to do a little tiny bit of a cop-out here, because my field of expertise on the flag is the good old red, white, and blue, stars and stripes. So I really can't speak to, individual flags, other kinds of, American flags like the one you showed, except to say that, they're technically against the U.S. Flag Code, but, there's certainly no one has to ever worry about, buying that flag or selling it, and flags like it.
I understand this. Now, why wouldn't they be arrested? Because it is on everything. It's like blankets,
right. Yeah, no, it's you have to think of it as a series of guidelines. There technically there's something like, if you if you sell an item on a T-shirt, it doesn't say that, just a commercial product, you're eligible for a fine of up to $1,000 in the District of Columbia or something like that. But if you can read it, it's online. Google U.S. flag code. But you'll never see anybody arrested for violating it. It's just not it's not even close to being a priority. You got to think of it as guidelines. Even though it's called in the code, even though it's technically part of the law, it's really just guidelines. So not to worry. Don't worry about it. Don't give it too much thought.
Okay. So, okay. Huh. So in the law, there's guidelines. Okay.
Guidelines. Thou shalt not. You know.
Okay, I understand. Okay. You're giving me a lot of homework. I mean, voluntary homework, but, my goodness.
It's your fault because you're asking these great questions. So.
I mean, hey, for the people. But so we can, okay, so that's noted. Third part of this episode. Thank you again for the people who just joined. Again, if you do and don't know, this is The Objective History of the American Flag, although I think we should reconsider that title, considering we're covering so much. You all, of course, this recording will be available later on, so you can just rewind. So we're on the third part of our episode. And I absolutely love the birds in the background. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I have terrible internet in my house, and we live out in the country, so I come over here to our library in a little park behind here. So
I love it. So yes, third part, perceptions. So in a June 2018 WNYC News article, people were asked on Facebook how they felt about the American flag, and they were inundated with comments. So some people said the flag is beautiful and represents the best of American ideals. Some argued that in certain contexts, when it's flown from the back of a big pickup truck with tinted windows, they can be intimidating. Flags can be intimidating or even scary. So my question for you is, how deep do you think that fear originates? So is it just from, or it may just depend from person to person, but could it stem from our recent administration or just from colonialism deep in history? Where do you think that comes from?
That's another good question, and I think you're getting at it. I mean, I think it's an individual thing. I think it's generational. It's racial too, and I mean, I would strongly guess that most of the positive things came from white people, privileged white people, and vice versa. I do think things have been exacerbated since 2016, and I do think that a good thing has happened from that, and that is the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's really brought awareness to a lot of people who may have been aware, but it brought a sharper awareness of so many things, including what African Americans feel about what that flag represents. I don't even want to talk about this, but this has come up before in the context of the Confederate battle flag. And, that's a whole nother show. But to a lesser extent, I think it's extended to the red, white, and blue. As I said, starting with the Vietnam War and then gathering up steam right up to the current time.
Thank you. And I was just thinking this, but because my parents and I recently took a trip to Bradenton, Florida, but it's close to Tampa. You have to go through Tampa to get to Bradenton. But I remember like heavy traffic on the highway, and you turn to your right, and you saw this big Confederate flag flying, right? Like, oh wow, welcome home. But it's like, okay, but where does the flag code fit in that, or does that simply just apply to the American flag?
Yeah, correct. It doesn't have anything to do with the Confederate battle flag.
Okay.
Yeah, the flag code does. No, yeah, different topic.
Okay. Okay, so that was just a thought. So let's now just review the argument concerning nationalism and patriotism, because that's really why we're here. What is the difference? And I'll pose that to you.
Right. Well, there's nationalism, there's patriotism, and you left one out, and that's jingoism, right? Which, so if you want to start on the emotional level of the least, there's patriotism. The second one is nationalism, and there's jingoism. You've heard the phrase America first, right? So, I think patriotism is love of country. Nationalism is your country is great. I'm oversimplifying. And jingoism is everybody else stinks and you are the best. So, there has been a streak of this ties into nativism too, which has existed since this country existed. When the first waves of immigrants came, now not to speak of bringing enslaved people over here, but when they brought the Irish over here, there was a huge anti-Irish, anti-Catholic. The same with Jews in the latter part of the 19th century. Same with Italians. There was huge nativism outbreaks throughout the 19th century. It was against. It happened during World War I against German Americans, and then it, reached its nadir during World War II with the government, putting thousands and thousands of Japanese Americans into what amounted to concentration camps. They called them internment camps. So a lot of that is tied into this nativism, which has been a part of the fabric of the United States since people other than, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants kept coming here. So, and so I just think if you look at it on a continuum from patriotism, which can be benign, nationalism, we're getting there, and then jingoism, which is, not a great trait. So how's that?
Perfect. And and this whole topic really was inspired by a car ride with my mom and I, and we were just heading, just doing errands around the city, and we saw, a pickup truck beside us, and the American flag was flying, and I just felt not, instead of that sense of patriotism for the U.S., there's a little bit of fear, right? And it was just like, oh gosh. And so I just told my mom, and let me just provide a little bit more context. But I had just graduated from sophomore year. So we had taken AP World History, and I had just learned about the terms patriotism and nationalism. And I was like, there we go. At least for me, I felt that shift from patriotism to nationalism. But now that you added the term jingoism, what is that worse than nationalism?
Okay. Yeah. That's how wars get started. Nationalism, was one of the core causes of many wars, including World War I. But jingoism is, So
because that's how at least my teacher would describe it, was nationalism was that extreme patriotism. But
yeah, and I would say nationalism is to jingoism is to nationalism what nationalism is to patriotism, right?
Okay.
Take another step up the scale in the negative direction.
Right. Okay. And so we've touched on all three. And now let's do, is nationalism a serious problem, or is it just an abstract worry?
Why don't you ask me an easy question?
I know.
I'm going to do a little copping out here. Really, you've heard me talking for the last how many minutes about the history of the flag. That's what I really feel very comfortable talking about. Nationalism, not so much. So I think people should examine what they think about their country in their own head and weigh that question themselves. How's that?
Perfect. I will give you some easy questions in, I believe, this segment. I mean, not this segment, this part of the episode or the next. There was one. You had said in an interview, I forgot what the website was, But you had said that the feelings of near religious adoration for the flag that many Americans have for the flag is unlike anything in the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
So the question I'll pose to you is, how does religion fit into nationalism, and how far does it go back into American history? And I have another one if that one isn't.
Do you mean how is religion tied into the almost religious feeling that we have? Yeah. Again, I wish I knew. I mean, I could nibble around the edges of it, but I will tell you that before I started writing the book, Flag: An American Biography, I had an idea that Americans had this, exceptionalist view of our flag. But you can't write a book about an idea that you have. So I did my homework and I read everything I could. I talked to flag experts and I put a query out on a talk list, a sociology talk list, international, and I asked that very question. I got lots of answers, lots of them, from people who had live in other countries, but who had spent significant amount of time here or even lived here, and they agreed with me. Almost everybody said, yeah, we like our flag okay in, fill in the blank, Bolivia, Australia, Austria, whatever, but not like you Americans, just take a look around. When you talked about your drive and seeing the big American flag, the next time you're in the car, wherever you are, anybody who's watching, look out and start counting the American flag, or just be aware of them. You will be surprised at how ubiquitous it is. So that's my take on that. And I wish I could, but I just don't have a handle on tying the religion to the cult of the flag. I call it a religious like, So I think there's something inside of people, anywhere, tribal, whatever you want to call it, to have symbols of that they believe in as a tribe. And I think that that's the biggest part of the cult of the flag, rather than what religion you are and how that plays in.
Yeah, because when I'd even researched it, I was like, well, that's an interesting statement. I researched just religion and nationalism, and there were two terms, and it was religious nationalism and Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
By the way, I'm not going there. Okay.
See, I had to send it, no question attacked. See, so we'll just go into analyzing these last two events to just make this conversation topical to what's happening now, and then just go into impacts and solutions. Really brief. Oh my goodness, brief parts of this episode, and then we'll give the people your links, where they can buy your books, your website, etc. So let's go into these two events. One being the insurrection, and the second being
Black Lives Matter. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I interrupted.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's good. So it's going to be the two events that we'll go into now. Now, I'll just give a brief shout out to my dad, because he did inspire this part of the conversation. And he had me thinking yesterday, because in the one event that was the insurrection, I think it brought a lot of confusion to people in the U.S. It was like, okay, so we see the American flag, but they're coming after the Capitol. It's a little confusing. So we'll actually first start with kneelings. I don't even know why I started elaborating on that one. So we'll begin with Bruce Maxwell, a catcher for the Oakland A's, who made a statement regarding him taking a knee in protest at his first major league. At one of his games. So he had said, the point of my kneeling is not to disrespect our military. It's not to disrespect our Constitution. It is not to disrespect this country. But my kneeling is what is getting the attention, because I'm kneeling for the people that don't have a voice. And this goes beyond the Black community, and this goes beyond the Hispanic community, because right now we're having an indifference and a racial divide in all types of people. My kneeling and the way I did it was to symbolize that I'm kneeling for a cause, but I'm in no way or form disrespecting my country or my flag. And then it was in 2016 that Colin Kaepernick first opted to kneel on the sidelines during the singing of the national anthem in protest of police brutality towards people of color. Now, the question I'll pose is, who really gets to decide what the flag means? As you can see here, everybody has their own take on it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can't answer it definitively. What I can do is point you to something in history that is kind of analogous, especially to the insurrection. You know, when there were people who had American flags, they had Confederate flags. One guy had a pro-Holocaust T-shirt on. Go back in history and Google Ku Klux Klan 1920s. When there was a rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan, they had huge rallies, including in Washington, D.C. Right down Pennsylvania Avenue, thousands of Ku Klux Klanners in their horrible, hoods and whatever those white things. Guess what flag they were flying? Guess what flag they were flying in profusion? Not the Confederate battle flag. They were flying the flag of the United States. They were flying the Star-Spangled Banner. So, I didn't find that out until I was doing the research for my book, and it shocked me. But, I think it goes exactly to your point. What does that mean? What are they saying? I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with, or what does it have to do with? It has to do with white supremacy because they're white supremacists. But why do they choose the American flag? That's their interpretation of it. So I think that goes forward to the people flying the flag at a violent demonstration against the U.S. Capitol, and I think it has an impact, or it has something to say about the kneeling and the sports protests too.
Great. So it's really indefinitive, but it's up to you all to make your own decisions, because we're not going to force any of our belief systems upon you, but instead give you facts from sources that are openly available on the internet that you can simply just build upon with your own research. And we refuse to give one sides here, just like our conversation with Lewis and Clark professor Ben Gaskins 2 weeks ago, who is here to talk about voter suppression. We gave both sides with Texas Governor Abbott, but we also gave a clip of President Biden talking about voter suppression at his first press conference recently. So we'll give the second side, being others like a Wahoo fan thinking that it was, or it is, disgraceful and offensive to many patriotic Americans, active military personnel, and veterans when kneeling in protest, and that oftentimes it's being exploited as an attention grabber. But there are other less sensitive platforms that could be used. He says that demeaning our revered American symbols in any manner is an insult to many past and present military persons that are serving our country and the families who have lost loved ones making the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. So again, it's really up to you. Use these, I wouldn't even say facts, because it's just research that I've gathered overnight. You can always replay and elaborate as you so choose. So that was one event. Our second being the insurrection. So let me find it here. Okay. So many in the mob who stormed the U.S. Capitol a few months ago came armed with a portable and a potent weapon. One guess, just going off the conversation that we've had for the past 55 minutes. A flag! Yes. So there were large election banners and battle colors from the American Civil War, as you said, neo-Nazi flair, Christian symbols, and a smattering of national and state flags. So seen as a whole, they would definitely serve as like this twisted ideological quilt for those who believe that the U.S. election was stolen from incumbent President Donald Trump. So one question that I would have for you, just going off of the conversation him and me had yesterday, which flag was attacking the Capitol? And can we decide what the flags and bands present at the insurrection meant or stood for?
Yeah, I'm not answering that question.
Okay. No worries. Okay, so
no, I think you answered the question by asking it. I really do. I think you stated it really, really well. The differing interpretations, and I think you know probably how I feel about it. So let's let it go at that.
Okay. Second, pretty simple. How are flags the most important artifact?
Yeah. Too broad.
Too broad.
Too broad. Really, I mean, we've been talking for 45 minutes about exactly that. I mean, it's you got to go back to the whole history of it, you know, and I think we laid that out pretty well. So.
Perfect. So on to impact, because I told you I was going to be brief. I'm going to ask you all to remember 3 numbers: 81, 90, and 94. 81, 90, 84. Not 94. I didn't mean 84. I meant 84, not 94. Wow. So 81 stands for 81% of U.S. adults who cited the future of the nation as a significant source of stress. Here's what's crazy, compared with 80% who cited the coronavirus pandemic, 74% who cited political unrest around the nation, 72% who cited the current political climate, and 66% who cited the January 6th breach of the U.S. Capitol. I find that to be pretty disturbing, considering that we found the future of this nation more concerning the coronavirus pandemic that is killing millions. Now we have 90%. I asked you to remember 90. 90 stands for the overall percentage of Americans who say they hope that the United States moves towards unity. There's 92% of Democrats, 91% of Republicans, 88% of independents holding that view, and 70% of Americans saying that the current social divisiveness in this country causes them stress. Lastly, 84. 84 stands for the 84% of Americans who reported feeling stress-based emotions in the 2 weeks before this survey was conducted. The most common emotions including anxiety, which was 47%, sadness, 44%, and anger at 39%. I'll just leave those stats with you all, and I'll also provide the link in the comments somewhere, whenever. But yes, those were stats that I believe already provide us a light overview of the impact of this. I wouldn't even say conflict. That's too intense. But we have a word between the differing perceptions. I'm not sure. You all can brainstorm a word.
How about disunity?
Disunity! There you go. So that provides a pretty basic overview. And as for solutions, we'll go off of the stats that described what the American people want and what they're looking forward to being American unity. How can we do this? How can we make American unity a priority? And that's the question I'll pose to you, if that's appropriate.
Oh, I'm not answering that.
No.
Somebody much, much smarter than me will have to answer that. I would think that would be the most wonderful thing that could happen. I wish I knew. I really did. I mean, people should start talking to each other, I guess. I mean, some people do, some people don't. You know, I wish I knew the answer, but I'm for it 100%. How's that?
Right. Broad. But if you all have any ideas, comment and forward it off to our current administration. And okay, let's see. Okay, so according to some research, of course, that I collected yesterday, it can not come down, I guess some primary suggestions. 1, voting. You need to cast your votes. It is no good complaining if you didn't vote. So the wisdom of the electorate is only tested when everybody exercises their democratic right to vote. So if we ask ourselves who will best work towards the goals that we all have, that we all share, we'll probably elect the right people. So the other important thing is to be prepared to acknowledge when the other side, wait for it. Oh, this is the shocker for you all, maybe. Be prepared to acknowledge when the other side has a valid point, and then we will be more thoughtful and less neutralic. Another thing is the advent of social media has allowed us to speak to one another in a manner that we probably wouldn't choose because we're behind this. So if we were to have a face-to-face conversation, we definitely wouldn't be commenting the things that we say face-to-face. Another thing is goals. I think we all must focus on the goals we want for ourselves, pardon me, and our nation before we think about the politics of how we achieve these goals. So we need to ask our politicians whether these common goals are their priorities and ask them to provide a roadmap for how they'll work to these goals, if they're willing. Another thing that I found interesting online were the two ways Americans can bridge our racial and political divisions. One, it's a lot easier said than done, but something that I can at least put into this virtual space. Humanize people rather than harmonize parties. I love this because I was like, oh, wow. But they had basically said that we invent these political parties to articulate our views as opposed to inventing views for us to fight over. Again, including these statistics, because you all know that I love them. 71% of Americans believe we have more common ground than one would assume based on the vitriol of our political language. The second thing being, see the problem as the enemy. So let's use the Capitol Hill riot on January 6th as an example. So the rioters involved were primarily Caucasian, male, and supporters of our previous president based on available information. So it's safe to assume, I won't even go there, but the problem was the loss of life, the destruction of property, and the psychological threat this riot caused to duly elected members of Congress and the American public. Going back to the original statement, the enemy is the violence and the other destruction, not the GOP, right? So I will leave that all there for you to dissect. My words today, dissect. And I'll ask you to close out the program by just providing us with your links to your website, where we can buy your books.
Sure. Yep. My website is just myname.com, markleepson.com. You can find all my books on Amazon. You can get them through my website too, which will just switch you through to Amazon. You can email me, which is my email is markleepson@gmail.com. I'd be happy to hear from people if they're interested in my books. So.
Okay. You see, it's all on books. Perfect.
Look at you. Very good. Excellent.
Okay, so that is all. I hope you all got a little something from this. Make sure that, at least know that this recording will be available on YouTube once it loads and buffers and gets itself together, and you all can rewind and see some parts that you'd like. But yes, thank you so much, Mark Leepson, for joining us today.
You did a fine job. Really good. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will see you all whenever. Have a great, oh my goodness, Monday today.
Bye.